Yo, peace to the planet. You know what it is, man. Adisa Banjoko, man. Time to holla at a scholar, man. I got my AM coffee. Look at that. Made in the 70s. That's OG right there. You got to be paying attention. It's called Easter eggs in the films. That's what they call them. I'm chilling with Ralek Gracie today. Come on, man. Come on, man. Like Ralek Gracie, Metamoris. Ralek Gracie, like Gracie family lineage, royalty. You know what I'm saying? Movie maker, documentary type dude. Come on, philosopher. Welcome to Bishop Chronicles, man. How are you this morning?
Thank you, man. Yeah, that was a very concise intro. I appreciate it. That was effective. That was
You
cool.
see, I just get in there, bop, 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 bop,
Good.
bop, and then I'm out. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mm-hmm.
vibes. That's the
Yeah.
vibes. How you doing today, man?
Mm-hmm. Man, I guess I'm blessed is the word. And
Yeah,
so just from our phone conversation, same deal. Just feeling blessed, feel good,
yeah,
feel like things are really it in so many ways full circle for me. So I'm just living the dream, as they say. So another day, another beautiful experience, and let's go for
yeah,
it.
man. No, that's fantastic. That's always good to hear, man. I just you haven't seen it, I'll send it to you when we get off. But I interviewed this amazing judo sensei from Japan named Reverend Kawahatsu. And so he was talking about his life and how like everything is really rooted in gratitude. And when he took you from his childhood all the way into this moment, like gratitude is where it's at, man. So like just to know you're blessed is a blessing because there's a ton who you never will.
Yeah, and I think yeah, knowing how much we don't know, I think is kind of the new for me. It's been the new level for everything. So just kind of getting started, feeling very fresh, very renewed.
Mm, absolutely, man.
Hmm.
No, that's great. That's
Hmm.
great. So, there's a lot of reasons I wanted to have you on. I mean, the main is because I've known you for a while and I just really admire you, as a martial artist and as an independent thinker, things like that. Plus, I know, you've been making documentaries recently and you have different film projects and stuff like that. Can you talk about those first and then we can get into some other stuff? Because I love the stuff you're making in film. I love the way it's shot. I love the silence in it. Like there's a lot of beautiful things that you're doing, like with playing with silence and visuals. Can you talk about this for me?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. I think I went on to this, I guess, this really deep dive that was trying to understand the mechanics of body movement beyond a style of martial arts.
Mm,
And I started by just studying many other styles. And as somebody who's always picked up a camera and enjoyed picking up a camera and playing with it and trying to capture moments with a camera, um, I kind of turned that passion toward what is my roots, which is martial arts. And so I started capturing different styles, but for the sake of obviously giving them reverence, giving them, an artistic stake in the kind of the landscape of what is just global martial arts
mm,
as it relates to my understanding. So thinking about my history of jiu-jitsu, my history of everything I'm supposed to know about what jiu-jitsu represents, well, how does that connect to every other style? How does that connect to regular life, for someone who doesn't even train, who doesn't even care
they're not even in the game
if
really.
they're, if they fall down, how do they fall? And
Mm,
why does it work one way or another? Why is it, why does it hurt them versus not hurt them? And so these things are really interesting, and they kind of cross the line from I'm somebody who's a geek about martial arts to I just am trying to live my life more effectively and more safely, or more effectively, I would say. Safety is not always necessarily the goal. You have a
right.
mission. It's not necessarily that, obviously safety first, but it's more how we move forward through life and accomplish what we need to accomplish, or just, for some people it could be staying safe to a certain extent, and that
Right.
becomes your goal. But for me, it just became this understanding of the mechanics that became a very deep dive and a new level of my passion as a filmmaker. And so more recently, I just posted a video of this Aikido student in Japan that I shot when I was there as part of a whole journey that I took at the end of 2019, right before COVID hit. And much of that footage became, I put together much of that footage into Confluence, which is my feature length documentary that really is a love letter to all of martial arts. It's just like a full, display of just how the juxtaposition of different styles essentially culturally and mechanically kind of, you know, I guess, have kind of this spirit that is united, and
Right.
so that's kind of a whole deeper subject. But essentially, this whole journey and this whole capturing of different styles, it's now that I kind of see what I was able to bring together and the amount of content that I was able to capture. There's this shot that I just posted on my Instagram of a kid who is the student of this Aikido master at this school in Japan, there in Tokyo, and he's doing this front roll. And this was just like a little side thing that I saw him doing a front roll. He was just playing around in the class,
Right.
not playing around, just
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was just
just enjoying
comfortable
himself.
and just
Yeah, yeah.
did a roll. And I went, wait a second, like, can you do that again? And this was just kind of separate from what we were already shooting. And he ended up doing these, really smooth front roll and back roll movements that, I grew up thinking I knew how to do a front roll. And he's not even a master, but he was
Right.
doing a front roll in a way where I didn't know it could be done like that. And there's components of it in the mechanics of it that are just they're just really interesting in terms of, oh man, like you can actually relate to the ground like that and
Mm-hmm.
have a complete hip rotation
Mm-hmm.
with your head going over your head going beneath and then your head coming back up with your hips doing a full 360, and you're doing it in a way where you're operating like a wheel on
Bro.
the ground, which is like you're basically a wagon wheel,
Yeah.
and you're mechanically so sound. And and it's interesting because it's not that somebody who isn't trained can't do that, but I've never seen somebody do that and it was just this one, you know he's not
Motion.
random per se, but it was this one person in Japan that
Yeah.
ended up doing that, and he was a student of this Aikido master there. And so I think in Aikido that's something that they just practice, is my assumption, but I don't
Yeah.
know, so it was just that profound. And that's in my film and stuff. But I just recently was talking to one of my students about that exact clip,
Mm.
and one of my students in class brought that up, like, hey, do you remember how significant that role was? Because it just looks, it just functions and looks in a way that it's unique. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody roll like that. I don't know if you know what clip I'm talking about, but if you've
I
seen
haven't I
anybody
haven't
roll
I
like that.
haven't seen that clip, but I
Okay.
have seen um I don't know if you're familiar with this one particular style because it's kind of rare outside of the black community, but it's called Sanukus. Sanukus is like a small circle style of jujitsu, kind of in the theme of like Wally J a little bit. If you know, like it deals with like wrist lock, like standing wrist locks, and it can be very Aikido like. Okay, it can be very Aikido like in its standing
Mm-hmm.
expression, right? And so the main guy behind Sanukus is a guy named Dr. Moses Powell who passed away a long time ago. But his guys were the FOI, the Fruit of Islam for the Nation of Islam. So like on the East Coast, all those guys are Sanukus. I mean, and they are frighteningly dangerous. Like I'm not even kidding, they're dangerous. And so um, years ago, I saw a videotape that Moses Powell had put out before he died, and his students were doing these forward rolls, and the mic is on. And so about 8 of them go across and they'll roll like twice. Zoo, zoo, zoo. Bro, it sounds like a whisper. It sounds like a whisper.
Mm-hmm.
And they are like a perfect circle for just like half a second. They are a perfect circle. And those moments that a human being, I think we miss the beauty of martial arts sometimes because we love the fight, right? We're animals, and there's a sublime beauty in combat if you can still yourself enough to observe it. It's not just violence, right? It's not
Mm.
just violence. It can be deeper. But in the practice of these movements, I have seen guys from Sanukas. I have seen some Aikido people before um, move with just a poetic fluidity, man. That it just reminds you of the beauty of the human spirit, that we can move like that, that we can choose to move all of these ways is a miracle in itself.
Yeah, and I think that my, I guess, uh, my intention with it is to study, and it's the art of war. You know,
Yeah.
it's the idea that what exactly is true about this movement that becomes useful
Yeah.
under under a plethora of circumstances, or for that matter, an unknown, unexpected circumstance. And how does that apply to everything else I know?
Hmm.
And so it's not and so, and at the same time giving respect of, okay, this is what somebody does, full reverence, you know,
Right.
they're doing a unique expression that I'm not familiar with. And but it's all within the realm of possibility. Obviously, it's all happening. And what about it makes it universal?
Hmm.
And I think that's where I started to, with through my filmmaking and through my studying of these styles, it started to influence the way that I teach and the way that I learn martial arts, and really just the way that I perceive mechanics and perceive combat and conflict. And it completely reframed my perspective on it. And so that was kind of the filmmaking side. It became, you know, it just was my curiosity, really.
Yeah.
And when I started out shooting some of these different styles, and I ended up shooting about 18 different styles as I was traveling during that time period. And, you know, it was like one after the other, I started to see a pattern. I started to see things that were were influencing my perception of combat, and, you know, giving and really just clarifying, you
Mm.
know, what it is that were things that were working in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and things that I was taught, clarifying how ubiquitous some of these concepts are.
Right.
And then and then it became, oh, that's, you know. And so it's kind of like, you know, you know, even a garbage can gets a steak, you know, or like a broken
Right.
clock is right twice a day.
Right. Right. Right.
There's always a nugget. There's always something that
Ooh,
is
there's a movie.
true,
Yeah.
you know, that, you know, John Jones could use in the UFC about that front roll. You're just not paying attention enough, is what I was, you know, is the
Right.
message that I got. Is like,
Right.
oh, we're not paying attention enough, because clearly that's happening in the wild. You know, somebody's
Hmm.
doing that.
Hmm.
So, and so the fact that we can't see what is there about that is the problem. It's not that it's not there or that it can't be done. And so that's why I think people can't, you know, people get stuck in style so much, and it's an ego thing because you feel good that you know something. And
Yeah.
so you continue to give yourself that confirmation bias of, I know jujitsu, I know what the Gracie's taught me, or I know what somebody so and so taught me,
Hmm.
and this works for me, and it's worked for me to this degree. Well, what about when it's not going to work for you? Can you try to wrap your head around that?
Yeah.
And
What
so
other what
that's
other expressions can you embody? Right. What other
where's the well, and you get to a point where there's a gray zone where you just can't define it. And the question is, are you comfortable with that? And
right?
so then you start to get, you know, so that exists, that gray area of how much you can actually accept that you're not ready.
Mm.
And then and then you start to that has like a gravitational effect against what it is that you think you know already. And then and it's being kind of there's an orbit with
Right.
your own experience of what are you willing to test yourself against. And this is the thing, is like people don't have the experience of being under huge amounts of pressure, testing themselves against another body that is intentionally trying to kill them or ruin
Divert
them
it,
or
right? Just
slow them
divert
down.
it. Yes, bro.
Yes. Or just, and then if you do, your experience might be isolated to just your friends in the academy who really are trying to be better than you. That's one level of that. That's just one piece of that. And you might be thinking you might be orbiting everything around that experience of the toughest guy in your gym, how that feels when he puts pressure on you.
Right.
And the hard part is to extrapolate that to, oh, somebody who really is like coming out of left field, who trained a certain way that you're not even familiar with, who has a body mechanic that is just unique to
Yeah,
them,
to
and
them.
plus their own style influences. And they're coming with the intention of choking you or knocking you out, or or running you over with a car, if you want to
Yeah.
extrapolate that far. So
Right.
just kind of like, and so this is where it becomes very difficult to guide people in martial arts. And there are people who say, oh, we're going to guarantee you're going to be effective in self-defense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, what is self-defense? Right? How do you really
Yeah.
become ready for self-defense? It's impossible.
Right.
You can't ever be ready. And so that's why I think really good, really dangerous fighters are actually very humble in many cases because of that, because they
They
know
know.
any moment somebody can pull their card, because there's so much there's so much gravity to what they're willing to test themselves against, and what they think they've already trained, and what they think is within the realm of possibilities, and when that actually takes place. And so that's why I think ultimately, like, to be a good teacher of martial arts, you it's the you're the amount of pressure you've been under, and the amount, it's kind of like being a great leader or CEO. If you haven't been through some shit, if you haven't really lost and been
Yeah.
drugged through the mud, I don't know how good of a leader you're going to be.
Yeah, because you
Because
won't know until that thing happens, in warfare, Clausewitz called that friction, right? This thing between, we're gonna run across the meadow and take that hill. And then when you run across the meadow, it's really muddy.
yes,
Like up
exactly.
the
It's
middle, right?
immediately it wasn't what you expected.
Right. And then
Immediately.
that is friction. When the plan hits the moment and that moment is different, then what happens? Now it takes three times as long to get across the mud, which means you may never get up that hill. And if you do, only half the battalion will make it. Right. So it's like this thing
And
about
then you're just talking about the mud, and then there's a new, then there's a list of things that start coming into that, and this is why, even and it's interesting, is in business, and like talking to high level business people,
Mhm.
they have the same way of kind of really high level business people who have the experience, who've done things. If you just come at them and talk to them like, I know exactly what I'm doing, everything's done, it's a wrap, they're kind of like, whoa, like this person is a red flag. Because
Yes.
like you don't know, dude, like it's just
There's so many
there's
variants in
too
this
many
game.
possibilities of how this is going to go wrong. And so that, and so that's the part where, if you're running a school and you don't appreciate how many things are going to go wrong to a level that it should blow your mind, and then you're kind of starting from that point.
Right.
If I have a new student, and this is where, like, I want to be very mindful of what I even teach you. Like, I don't want to even give you that much information, because if you have to memorize anything, you're already late. And so it's a really weird, it's a very hard thing to do. And so it'd be similar to if I wanted to teach somebody in business right now. It's like, if anything, it's like you have to already have a certain amount of things that you have to have the desire, number one. If you're my student, it's like you have to want to engage with the unknown. You have to have certain desires. Otherwise, you're already so behind that it's like we just
Yeah.
need to have a conversation. But you having a desire and saying, man, I want to do this. Okay, cool. And then it's like you have to, now you're walking down this path of, I'm going to put challenges in front of you. And better yet, I want you to just engage and be willing to lose and to take this idea that you're not going to get everything you want. And I'm going to make you feel good about that process. So then it's like we're like therapists.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really, so it's it's a really interesting thing, because now you're constantly guiding somebody spiritually and emotionally and physically and mentally
Yeah.
down this path of I'm putting up little roadblocks for you and seeing how you do. And then the problem is you can think that because you're, as the teacher, you're giving somebody a certain number of roadblocks, like, okay, cool, we did it, everything's great, hey, what matters is that you're progressing, and it's, you're a new version of yourself. And that's true, but that's also like a little bit of a that's a little container. That's not an actual representation of, them adopting full adaptability intrinsically. you
Yeah.
you're not
No,
there
I
yet.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
so that's where but the problem is people they get on that journey and they're in this bubble with their school.
Yep.
And then they kind of like, for whatever reason, they'll start to like be so comfortable with the fact that they're jumping these little hurdles every day. But when you zoom out, it's like, man, what are you really ready for? And then you have people who are jiu-jitsu purple belts getting their ass beat in the street because
Bro.
they made an assumption about, hey, I'm ready for little hurdles every day against other people. Well, this is a different kind of hurdle.
Bro, listen.
And
You're speaking my
so
language so much. When I am in class with my students, I'm always like, look, like it's important that you remember that every time we're sparring here, like we're agreeing to a lot of different things. One, right? Like we're agreeing that
yes,
I'm not going to pick you up and slam you on the ground. We're agreeing that if
yes.
I'm not, if you're really about to take my right arm, but my left arm's free, I'm agreeing not to pound you in the nose with a hammer fist as hard as I can. But when you're trying this on the sidewalk, hopefully you never are, it's very different. You know what I'm saying? And you need to understand why it's different, right? Like
So
it's not
that's
you do
amazing
the
that you say
armbar.
that.
Go ahead, go ahead.
That's amazing that you say that, because that's exactly that gives somebody the scope of, wow, okay, we are agreeing to these things. And the problem is, and I would say, like, that's a good thing. And there's many things that we do, obviously, in that process. And that's one of them, is to say,
Mhm.
hey, look, let's not, we're making these assumptions. We're kind of bringing, we're accepting these certain truths as we train and as we kind of build these steps for our progression.
Mhm.
And that's one thing. Then the issue is, how much are you training them? Even though despite the fact that you're saying that,
Saying it. Right, right, right.
how much are you actually training them for the thing that isn't that?
Right. So,
That's the
so,
hard,
so normally when I give that conversation, it's because I'm about to show you something that applies to this idea. Right. So I'm like, okay, like, so here, let's look at an armbar from the closed guard as we normally would consider it, right? Between each other and agreed, I'm not punching or whatever. But what if they're punching? What if they intend to slam you? Because I said, the other thing is like, if you're dealing with a bigger, stronger opponent, you're assuming if you have someone in a closed guard that they're going to want posture. They don't know about posture. They're more likely to lean on top of you and just try to hammer hammer you from the sides of your head, that if you try to do any submission, they're more likely to try to punch their way out or slam you than pass, because they don't know what a pass is. They don't know what a pass is, and they may not even know what an armbar or triangle is, but they know this is starting to get uncomfortable. Looks strange, holding onto my arm in a strange way, and no one wants that in a physical conflict. So you have to think about how crazy it can be. And like you said, purple belts sometimes are getting smashed because they are sportively approaching a scenario that is intentionally much more different.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say this is why I don't really focus on submissions. I focus on one submission for my students.
When you
I
say
don't, I don't, I,
you mean one particular? You're just trying to get to La Monte Leon. You're just trying to get to the back and do the choke, or are you looking for a place of safety that can come from different positions?
no, I'm saying, yes, we're prioritizing one submission. And the purpose of that is that everything else, because when you mention that idea of somebody, getting caught in an arm lock and they're not knowing what's actually happening or whatever it is, the thing is your students are thinking about the armbar. They're not, if they're not feeling how they, how to respond when somebody is progressing
Mm,
against them,
mm.
and they're not responding to that, they're already late.
No, that
and
makes
then and then what happens is the submission is an extension of proper timing of overall positional progression. If once you're going to give me the submission, so my grandfather, people, famous quote, people would say, what's your favorite submission? He would say, the one they give me.
yeah, the one they give me. Yeah,
Well, what does that imply? That implies that strategically I'm so sound wherever we land that
on my way.
ultimately, as a manifestation of that, you're going to give me a submission.
Yep.
And so the problem right now in the game is everybody's so focused on submissions because it's the beautiful thing, it's the flower.
Right.
They're missing the roots.
And they're not even digging
It's
the dirt. You know what I'm
they're
saying?
not even,
Digging
yes.
the dirt.
And the thing, and it's not everybody, there are people who naturally are doing it. And I would say it's more the academies that are just putting people to roll and saying survive, because you start to just, you're in survival mode, and it's like, I'm not even teaching you a lot of stuff, I'm just putting you to survive, which is not many academies, but it's like those are the ones that you got to watch out for, because they're going to produce people that are just they're just highly adaptable and responsive. And the problem is not everybody can like deal with that, again, psychologically, emotionally. That's a very small subset of people. And the problem is we're trying to help everybody. And so if you're trying to take somebody who's not a natural, or is not just willing to put themselves under that level of stress from day one in their training, which most people can't handle anyway, and it's no
It's
way to
true,
it's no way
man.
to run a
It's very
business.
true. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
hard and that's the hard part, is now we're talking about business versus
The experiences of the customer.
just having a boys club of people who are savages. And you're
Yeah.
taking only the kid whose parents are going to pay for his tuition, or he can't afford tuition because he's just a savage, and but he's willing to show up and just put in the time.
Yeah.
And so that same old conversation. And so, and the thing is it, and obviously that's all just generalizations anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Of
It's
course.
all
Right. Yeah.
just whoever shows up and you figure it out. But what I'm saying is, as a priority, and this is why what I started to do was say, and I think it kind of sounded like crazy talk to people, because I started to say, whoa, what are the things that don't change in an interaction, let's just say between two people?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that are unchanging variables,
Yeah.
as I call
Immutable.
it?
Immutable elements of the engagement.
What would they be? and
Right.
and See, it's funny because I was never taught this. Nobody ever talked to me like this.
Right.
Nobody, this was never a conversation that we
Just
had
you
growing up.
contemplating it. This is just you contemplating.
Well, and this was just my path and my experience and getting to, and again, like studying other styles, getting a view of it, having combat experience, competing and having people try to, really hurt me, who are
Right.
intentional, who are professional athletes. And
Right.
then, having, being in street fights and being so, and also just growing up training with the cream of the crop and having an experience that was being able to pick and choose, like having access to so many different people in the training. But not until much later did I realize, more recently did I realize, like, the things that are unchanging, that are universal about this exchange
Mm,
are actually like very gross. Like they're not, they're so for example, there's only 5 unchanging vectors, as I call them. So
okay.
the battlefield, the ground that you're on,
Right.
right? The oncoming force,
Right.
right? Which is them, which is your
Right.
opponent.
You call it.
The gravity,
Mm-hmm.
you,
Mm-hmm.
and your goal,
Right.
your macro goal.
Right.
And if is there anything I'm leaving? Like, is there anything else you think that's unchanging? See,
No,
and
that
the problem with the exercise, the goal of the exercise is to reduce everything.
right, right. And try to get it to
You
boil
reduce, you're completely, it's just like you're looking at like it's like Roblox. You're looking
down.
at like a video
Mhm.
game where just everything is stripped and you're going, okay, there's this one block, this other block, that's
Yep.
all we need. And and
That's
then
all I need.
and then the thing is once you do that as an exercise, you start to go, oh, why is that significant? Because if you're in a jiu-jitsu tournament, if your student is in a jiu-jitsu tournament, or they're in a MMA fight, or they're surviving for their life in their bathroom in their house against some assailant who's trying to
Right.
hurt them,
Right.
in a sense, they're playing the same game.
Mm.
And then the only thing is you're going to adjust slightly for, okay, now I'm actually in a jiu-jitsu tournament. And okay, and if you want to really specialize, you really specialize, but you got to know you're doing that.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's 2 bodies. And then if you say it's 3 bodies, then it's 3 bodies. Now it's,
Right.
then that's an additional, now you're adding another vector
Yeah. Yeah.
if you want to do that. So, or if that's what you're dealing with now, but the point is if now you went from 5 to 6 vectors, I can teach you much more effectively how to survive going from 5 to 6 vectors than I
Mm.
can teaching you the intricacies of 60 different submissions in our curriculum, plus 50 different guard passes, plus 100 different variations of each of those 50 guard passes, just to have you memorize stuff, just to show you that I know what I'm talking about. When in fact, what I'm really doing is just signing you up for a heavy level of distraction for the next 5 years. If I truly want you to be adaptable under
Right.
stress against another body. And so, and the results for me have just been crazy, have been amazing.
So wait, what's
In
the
terms
training
of,
for? Just so it's clear though, because everything you said makes sense to me. It just occurred to me that I didn't know the answer to the question. You said we were going for one thing. What is the one thing?
the one thing is you that's a good question. So you progressing towards your goal more efficiently as a response to an oncoming force. That's
Right.
it.
But the goal, so then the only true variant is the goal. Because the goal may not be to break
No, see,
something or
well,
somebody. The goal may be to
you
pin this
mean not variant. You
my
mean
trunk
not variant. You mean vector.
vector. Right.
Right. So variant is variant. Everything is, if it's variant, it's changing. It's, you know,
Yeah.
there's variance.
Right. I see what you're saying. So, but
Now,
so then the vector, the vector of the goal is the only thing that can vary because my intent may be.
yes, you have to choose your goal. And the thing is, your goal is going to choose you when you're under that much stress. your, your
That's
goal,
real.
your goal becomes very isolated and very clear to you. And see, this is what people don't understand about high stress is that you're the stress becomes a guide to your opportunity for you to reach your goal. And it's like, you know,
Time, dog. Your stress becomes a guide. Go ahead.
for the opportunity for you to reach your goal, because you get an opportunity. This is the thing, and this is why my grandfather would say that my favorite submission is the one they gave me. Well, if somebody wants to fight you, if they're engaging with you, they're giving you nothing but opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we see it, because you can't, it couldn't be any other way, because it's like this. I'll give you the inverse. If somebody just walks away from you and goes on a plane and goes to another country, can you ever catch them in a submission?
Of course not. Yeah, they're gone.
Right. So you know, everybody wants to be lit and have the best submissions, and I can beat everybody, I can catch everybody. Okay, well, can you catch them if they're not even coming towards you?
Right.
You can't. And so what does that mean? So it means as I'm coming towards you, I'm giving you the opportunity to catch me. How, well, the question now is how clear can you see that?
Right.
And the hard part is you're not going to see it very clearly when somebody starts punching you in the face first. Now, but
Noted.
this is the thing, you will though, if you can allow yourself to be that present.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
will actually further clarify, because it will be increased stress. And so
Mm.
this is where I think that ultimately people are training for stress and composure under stress above anything if they want to be the most adaptable to the unknown. That's where, and this is where the cool thing for like for martial arts as a is like somebody who I've just been geeking out on martial arts and the history and everything is like
Mm.
the and just the folklore and like the you know when what's her name in the in Kill Bill
Yeah.
when the
Uma
girl
Thurman.
goes, Uma Thurman goes to the mountain in China with the master.
Pai Mei.
Yeah, what most of what he does is just break her down psychologically. He doesn't, you know, it's not like, oh, and I think there was like this one technique, but it was like the essence of that was this was just a psychological battle for you to get to
Yeah,
this
totally.
level where you could see that you could do this.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And that's the traditional Chinese martial arts, and this is like a, you know, it's an interesting, you know, how you see it politically or whatever. It's not really an issue. It's like it's more of the way that they came up. These Chinese martial artists was so heavy and so militant and so
Yeah.
much just about, it's just about internal external martial arts, which is that your mind and your body are capable of going through things to the extent that, and we have this in our military as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
where you know the highest level elite, the SEALs, their training is you can go in the freezing cold water for 6 hours and then you can
Mm-hmm.
get out and shoot a gun at and
Mm-hmm.
aim it perfectly and not miss your target,
Yep.
and then wire an explosive device, and then,
Right.
you
And
know,
swim
so
back. Right. Exactly.
in a way that's, you know, that's what, you know, and so yeah, that's, it becomes a bigger psychological question of how do you prepare people for the unknown. And
Yeah.
so, you know, and many of these academy environments now, they're really just, it's like a social club and we hang out and we train and we do things, and it's like we don't want that stress, and hey, it's cool, and here, this is what, and the stress is actually in the training, right? It's like,
Right.
hey, now it's time to spar, and you start feeling like, ooh, and better people, and then if you go and compete, that's another step. of
Right.
like, man, I'm going against new people and I'm
Yep.
testing myself. But the point is it's important to just put all this in context and say, oh, okay, that's what you're actually doing over there. And yes, and it brings to mind that, it kind of brings to bear this notion that individuals are going to respond uniquely under stress. And you, like you said, you have a student who's a natural,
Right.
and it's like, well, what is that? There's clearly a physical component, but there's also a psychological component where somebody's drawn, they're
Yep.
very dialed in, they're,
Yeah.
whereas you could have a student who's like, oh yeah, I heard about this jujitsu stuff, and man, this sounds cool, and it'd look great on my Instagram that I do jujitsu. That's completely different than the girl who's a natural, who's already,
Right.
excelling in the competition.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Um, I wanted to ask you, like I find teaching jujitsu to be very stressful, right? Not from like a really bad place, but from a like, I'm always trying to make sure that I'm giving them best technique expressed in the best way that I believe they can grasp it, right? And the one thing that I am happy about in my teaching is I believe I'm good at helping different kinds of psychologies understand the same move within the same class, right? And that can it's they're both physical aspects of that. This person's tall, this person's short, and then like again, there's this psychological thing, like figuring out the language that she needs to hear in the same session to make her get the move that he needs to hear, but he needs to hear something totally different to make the same move happen for him. So, um, I wanted to ask you, like, what were some of the core principles that your grandfather Elio emphasized when teaching techniques? Like, to what degree was there a specific philosophy between how he structured the learning? I'm just really curious.
Yeah, I mean, man, I think that's a very big question because my experience is him later in life giving very like, it being a very specific kind of technical. There was a few angles to this. One is having a technique that is leverage based and doing it with detail and doing it correctly. And there
Mm,
was kind of this dogma to that of like the technique is, has to be done this way, or this was the way
right.
it was
That's
done.
how we need
And
execution.
and clearly, like, and there was also a lot of refinement. There was like, and there would be pushback and people, there would be
Mm,
questioning and in the laboratory and that
mm,
whole thing. But the thing that I'm realizing now about the inception of jiu-jitsu in Brazil, as opposed to as it transitioned from Japanese jiu-jitsu, and of course, the thing is there's no real one inception point. There's just a it's just a it's like where the river meets an ocean in some parts of the world, and they have
right.
like color mixing,
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
There's
Yeah.
always just, and that's why my film is called Confluence, by the way, is
Right, right.
and so that, but the idea is that there's really no start, there's no end, but there's definitely individuals who pick something up
Mm,
and then by their nature in an intention evolve it a certain way. And this has happened from all martial arts.
right,
And it's
right.
so the individuals that become kind of iconic and really take the responsibility of, I want to apply this. What happens is they have to apply it. They take the onus of applying it in the moment for their communities, and they take the onus of testing it on themselves to a degree that validates what they're doing for that moment.
Right.
And the thing is there's kind of a time sensitivity to a certain extent because and so it's like my grandfather Elio in his prime in Brazil, building the academy, testing it, having everybody in there, the laboratory.
Mm,
What the biggest part of it to me is that the intention was to be ready for whatever, for anybody of any size, of any time limit in a match, punches, no punches.
Right.
And they set that intention. And that's what changed it from Japanese judo at the time, where the intention was actually to just be a global sport.
Right.
So
Right.
like judo was growing as a global sport institution, and the federation
True.
and the
Yeah.
Japanese in Japan, they made trips to Brazil to bring Elio and Carlos into the fold and offered them opportunities to basically accept allegiance with the federations in
Right.
Japan and say, hey, come under our wing and basically do things how we want to do things.
Hmm.
Don't keep going on this path of being real about
Right.
testing this against anybody of any size with no points. You know, judo is a point system. It became a
True.
point system. It became, I can throw you and that's the end of the match. And
Right.
so much of the discrepancy between judo and jiu-jitsu at that time was actually a point discrepancy and a rules
An intentional. Right.
engagement.
What is the intention of this engagement?
Exactly. And that's
Right.
what, and it's, you know, I've read both of Robert Drysdale's books. They're very
Right.
good.
Right.
Um, and one of the things that I just recently was debating with him about is he makes this claim that, you know, um, Japanese jiu-jitsu and judo and really kosen judo
Right.
is
Cosign.
the Niwaza ground judo,
Yeah.
um, is essentially when you look at videos and you look at pictures and you look at the documentation that was available, that it was essentially, you know, exactly what the Gracies were doing, and that it was just this carbon copy, and that
Hmm.
really my grandfather hadn't innovated anything, and
Hmm.
really all they did, my grandfather was only focused on self-defense. And so this thing that we call Brazilian jiu-jitsu didn't really change from the Japanese Kosen judo pre 1900s, late 1800s,
Right.
to it didn't even change until the early 1990s when
Right.
CBJJF blew up, and IBJJF became a thing eventually, but CBJJF, and then Carlson Gracie's team, when they focused nothing on nothing but group training sessions.
Training. Right. Right. Right.
But my question to you is, why was Carlson and Holes and Hickson, they're the fruits of Elio's labor.
That's
If
true.
they, where did that come from? Why did all of a sudden these complete savages come out of the same dojo? Was that just nothing comes from nothing?
Yeah. I mean that makes that's actually that's a
You know what I
really
mean? He
no,
gives
that's a
Carlson
really
all
good
this
point.
credit. He gives Carlson all this credit. But hold on. If Carlson was that amazing, Carlson was Elio's student.
It's true. Okay,
So
okay. Hold on though. Hold on.
and
My this is heavy on my
so no, so let's go back to your question.
right.
Because you said, well, what was Elio's training modality, and what, see, and this goes back to, I wasn't even in the room, but what I'm learning now by my approach to teaching and by my perception of limiting variables, I'm sorry, of vectors, and starting to look at combat in a more ubiquitous way, what you start to get a story from what is essentially combat as a a human resource. It
Mm,
has intelligence. It's like a kinetic language.
mm.
So the story that I'm being told is the most profound thing that Elio did was he said, I'm going to set an intention of being ready for a new level of unknown.
Right.
That was his contribution, because the
Because that
result of
demands
that,
all the evolution from it, right? The
that
evolution
was the
is born from
exactly
that
that was he
intention.
set that precedent, and that was what he did in the laboratory. And
Yeah.
this is what I'm doing with my academy now. And this is the hard thing to do, because if you don't have a clear enough, and if you can't reduce your knowledge enough, you're not going to be able to do this effectively. not everybody can just go and start just preparing for the unknown. You have to have, there's certain things that, and that's where, and it's not that I'm the only one that knows this. Elio got this information from Japan. And so this is the thing about Robert Drysdale is like, I love his books. I learned a huge amount from his books. And if anything, I'm not like, I like that he's giving credit to more of the history, because ultimately nothing comes from nothing. And it's the same way Elio didn't just create everything
Right, right.
out of the blue, but he totally set a new intention. And his intention specifically was to help his community at that time. And so to answer your question, help your community right now. And the stress that you feel is valid because you're taking the onus. And then I would just advise, as a brother, I would say,
Yeah.
my advice to you would be to reduce as much as you can to core concepts, and to actually not teach as many moves as you're teaching, because what it does is it gives you it puts even more stress on you in the short term, but in the
Yeah.
midterm and long term, you're going to start to see the residual effects of, oh, I'm not just sitting here with my students throwing fish at them, I'm teaching them how to fish. And
Yeah. No.
it's kind of a, it's a scary game, because you can't plot everything in the sky, but you're building something that, you're giving somebody something that can say, hey, based on certain coordinates, you might be able to find yourself find your way out of the dark and out of the jungle. And that's the hard thing, and that's why there's not a lot of amazing teachers out in the world right now. There's a lot of teachers who are just putting people to compete or test themselves. It's
Right.
like, hey, just trial by fire, that's cool.
Right.
And you're only going to be able to guide so many people, because
So
that's what you're
far.
doing, and
Right.
that's okay.
Right.
That's your contribution, and everybody's limited. I can only help a finite amount of people, right? So I'm not under an illusion that I can, but at the same time, that's why I'm also reducing so much. And my online platform is not a technical platform. It's a conceptual, psychological
Yo,
deep
let's talk about
dive.
the platform, man, because I had so much fun learning on that platform. And I really
Tell me why. Tell me about it.
well, I think a lot of it has to do with starting from an open place, right? Like I like that the way that you break things down is so much more around um what I'll say, like higher concepts and principles than like, oh, when you grab the arm, you got to turn like this, or when you grab the wrist, you got to go like that. But like understanding how to observe even what you're doing. How are you observing what you're doing, and how do you translate that to how you teach it? And then how do you put that through kind of um, a level of still being open about whatever your intention is. The student is still a different human. And so how are we observing how they might understand, not understand, how they might perceive, misperceive, right? And I just really enjoy it. How do you describe
Well,
that
and
methodology?
you, to be fair, you haven't done any digital privates with me.
I know.
So well, that's supposed to be, that's part of the ASHU platform, is that,
Right,
and so because I kind of hooked you up, it's
right,
not whereas normally somebody signs up, they're included. You have a certain number of digital privates, and we should do one very soon.
yeah,
And that,
absolutely.
what that does is it kind of like, it like brings it to earth,
I
because
see what you're
it's
saying.
very conceptual. And so if you have your own approach already, and then you hear what I'm doing, you're getting certain vibes, but you're also kind of like, it's very hard to tie to,
Like,
okay,
how do
this is
I,
exactly what I'm doing with somebody, or this is exactly why this influences the way that I teach a set of techniques or a set of movements, for that
okay,
matter. And so that I would like, yeah, let's do that as soon as
Yeah.
possible.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what was
Absolutely.
your question? I kind of cut you off.
Um. Now I forgot, but
Okay.
I have another one. I do have another
Yeah.
one. You know, I think it was like a year ago. It might have been 2 years ago. Your father, Horian, who still doesn't get enough credit for creating the UFC. Um, he started teaching these how to teach classes, and I wasn't able to go because
Hmm.
I really wanted to go. Um, you I'm assuming you started under your father and then your grandfather would just show up periodically. That's pretty much how it went in your youth?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So then, like, as you reflect and as you observe, and even just hearing stories from your father, like, what did your father see as essential to preserve from the traditional method? And then what do you feel like he changed as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu started to come into American, mainstream? Like, how different did the methodology have to change? Because a little bit of the purpose and a little bit of the, yeah, and the demographic change, right? The demographic change.
I think what my dad did, I think what my dad brought forward was that he, it, again, was the intention.
Mhm.
Like, how simple can we keep it? Not and there was a huge amount of emphasis on technical proficiency, and so kind of preserving the details that he learned. And this is the interesting thing, though, is that to the extent that you preserve details, it's good, but it's also can be a limiter depending on how vast your scope is. And so, for example, the blessing of what we were given by him was that he was technically very proficient, but he still wasn't teaching us 600 moves.
Right. I
We
understand.
weren't on marcelogarcia.com doing breakdowns every day of,
Right.
entire curriculum. It
Right.
was it was a small, very concise curriculum that had many, very specific details, but it was like we made one statue as like our tutelage, as our training, and we just kept making it over and over. Whereas now, what you have is you have a new student in America somewhere who's training, who's like, oh, BJJ, it's great. Well, they're like studying, you know, 100 different modalities of learning, of technical, you know, breakdowns of curriculums that have been developed by so many different people all at the same time. You can access 10 online platforms, 20 with 600 plus move curriculums. And the thing is that that's just a big red herring, because
Right.
at the end of the day, what you're going to do to save yourself in a fight is going to be so few moves and so few techniques, and one primary kind of as feature or concept that is going to prevail is how adaptable you are and how sensitive and how much you can respond to that oncoming force. And so you're missing the point. And so the big thing that we got was we didn't miss the point. In some ways, you always are in some kind of, you have limitations always, of course. But
Right.
the big message and kind of the big thing he brought through for me was, and for my upbringing and my tutelage and the blessing that I had was, it was like, man, now go figure it out. You want to get good at a submission, go do that for 6 months. Don't do anything else.
Yo, I'm saying people,
Yeah.
I tell people that all the time. Like there's certain things when I'm rolling, like sometimes when I sit with a black belt who I want to get something from, the one thing I always ask them is, I want you to teach me the moves you can teach. Not just the moves that you know, but the moves that you can teach. Like, what moves do you can teach to anybody? Here's this guy, he just came off the street, he doesn't know jack. What do you show him? That's what I want you to show me. I
Right.
like that because I know that the person is hopefully, right, going to give me not only their best technique, they're going to give it to me with the best expression, and they're going to give it to me with their best understanding, right? Like I
Right.
don't want to hear about your berimbolo that you sometimes pull off on Tuesdays. I want to know, you know what I'm saying? And so what I'm asking, if their answer is the Americana, then I want that. It's not that I know the
Right.
Americana. I want to know what they see in an Americana. I want to know
Right.
how they move, how they breathe, right? Where they like to get this from, anything else. It's not about the movie. I want to know what they know they're really good at. And so
Yep.
you know,
What's
I
your samurai sword, right? Like what's the
yeah,
thing that
you know what I mean? Like when it's
the metal has been
yeah,
folded
and
over
when you
enough.
mean it
Yeah.
the most, when you mean it the most and it's fully real, what are you doing? Because that's
Yeah.
what's going to help me. When it means everything to you, what are you doing? Then that's what I want to learn, right? Um,
Yeah, and I think what happens and what you're speaking to is when somebody gets good, they what they do is they have a certain, let's say there's this one, call it a move, which I think is limiting, is very limiting, but let's just
all right,
say for the sake of definition, we call it a move. But
right.
really what it is it's kind of it's a platform because they built a platform with this concept,
Mm,
and now they're able to bloom with that platform to from so many different angles into that move that becomes so much more valuable in terms of adaptability under stress than just taking on content and trying to memorize content, and for that matter just trying to stay like ahead of the game, as if
mm.
it's like the war on drugs and you're trying to stay like one step ahead of the bad guys and you need like the new
We just got to beat the
technology.
cartels. We just
Right,
got to
so
beat the
it's not
cartels.
you're it's like you're constantly just evolving and building this platform,
Right.
and hopefully your platform is something that is scalable to the street,
Mm,
to the ring,
mm-hmm.
to a situation where somebody is 150 pounds heavier than you
Yeah,
or 100 pounds heavier than you. Can your platform scale to that?
it's
And so
fair.
that those are good questions, and so that's where I find that the influence that we had that came from my grandfather's first class of students and kind of subsequent, so that that um, lineage for me is, and that's what, like, my father coined Gracie Jiu-Jitsu when he came to America. But to me, that's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. That's like the brand of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and it's not just, hey, now we're selling Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and it's people can feel comfortable and do that, think they're doing Jiu-Jitsu when they're really just in a safe environment, which some people are creating for people. It's the
Right.
idea is, how do you, and it's not that you shouldn't have a safe environment. It's how are you approaching giving somebody the ability to adapt with a reductionist approach, that you're so generalized that you're essentially giving somebody an ability to be effective under stress
Mm,
with another body that
mm,
you know and I would say the downside is that you're going to be maybe not as ready for the guy who's doing the one wrist lock that you didn't train for in the dojo, but
right.
in some other academy. But it's like you're still training to be adaptive and evolve with another body in a way that is at a deeper level. And so that's, to me, it's not so much moves and techniques as much as it's the intention of how are you dealing with bigger bodies under more stress, under
Yeah.
longer periods of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that my dad brought forward very well. And I think Hickson brought forward, and I think other members of, the family, but also students of the family who were influenced by that, you know, to not get too lost in the weeds of all
Right.
this other technique and all this other stuff that we're trying to learn and stay ahead of the game on, you
It's
know?
it's it's really interesting, man. Like because one of the things that people are talking about now is the ecological method. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so I see a lot of arguing back and forth about the ecological method versus traditional methodology. And even when you use the word traditional methodology, like that is an umbrella term for so much. That is an umbrella term for so much. If you're just thinking about self-defense, gi, no gi, whatever, right? Like it gets really right. But however people define that. But what I've been thinking about is just that like almost taking us back to the beginning of this discussion around your film, right? Is that um in my two quick statements. In my belief, the thing that makes Gracie Jiu-Jitsu slash BJJ and or MMA different than all traditional martial arts is that it is alive intentionally because it is always innovating within itself and against itself, right? Like it's
Well,
going
see,
outward.
you just said something very important. You said alive, and I think the aliveness is what I would argue is, um, you know, not everybody's doing that, even in the Gracie family or anywhere else for that matter. The
This
to
I
be
agree with.
really to be really alive with your training is it implies a lot. That's a very that's a huge um, concept in and of itself to stay
Right.
alive, and that goes back to this idea of how are you testing it, what is your intention in terms of who you're preparing for.
Yeah.
You know, there's academies where all they're doing is talk, like they're developing their students to be ready for the point system at IBJJF.
Yeah, just rote memorization of how to score.
That's not aliveness.
Agreed.
That's
Agreed.
very much you're trying to just be ready for this rule set.
Yeah.
Alive, I would say more so as being a way of just the awareness of how how adaptable is that concept under every form of stress possible
And we can find
in,
it. Yeah.
yes, against any body, against in any territory, in any situation, you know, in a swimming pool, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
No, 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 no.
that's
It's real, man. I mean,
to me,
but
that's alive.
but
And that's
here's
where
the
it's like
thing.
my grandfather's thing was ride horses, swim,
Right.
you know, but not to, but keep going.
So that's one thing. The other thing is that in my the way that at least the way that I started learning from Half in Mountain View was that it was the a place of Socratic education, the Socratic methodology of show a move, explain a move, and then talk through the different ways in which it may pop off. You see what I'm saying? So like here's an arm bar. And then he shows the arm bar. So, but how I can't do it because my angle's not here. But you don't have the angle because your foot's not properly there, knee's not properly there. Da, da, da. Oh, but what if the guy's punching? Whatever. That Socratic thing to me, done under the right mindset with the proper intention, is what makes it alive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is what makes it alive. So
Well, and well, yes, I think that's that, yes, having a healthy debate and having an environment where you can ask questions. But I
mm,
would say that the other part of that is what kind of pressure you're able to develop around that pressure testing, and this is why like it's very difficult to um, for a student, um, you 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 want to create the environment where you can really, it's like you're pressure testing something. But and this is why, generally speaking, if you have a very good, if you have somebody who's very tough, like how, for example, in a school, and he's showing up every day training with his students, they're being pressure tested by him.
right, right, right.
And if he's not there, somebody else needs to do that.
Right.
Otherwise, how do we know what we're talking about? And so, you know, and in many environments, in the academies in Brazil and in where we came up, and much of it was, how much pressure can you build in a room and
Yeah.
still have everybody be friends?
Yeah, that's real. That's a big deal. That is a really big deal,
Yeah,
man. And
yeah,
man, I think that that's something that, and we have to wind this down, but I want to say that one of the things that is important in teaching is learning how to turn the pressure up and not allowing things to get personal. Understanding that the pressure
yes.
is not because somebody doesn't like you or they have bad intentions, but you know what I'm saying? So that's totally
Well,
real,
and
man.
not only that, what happens is, under pressure, as we already know, that's when people's emotions and things start getting exposed. You're having problems at home, or you have
Right, right,
something that's
right.
coming up
Yeah.
with, and so you know, that's, things start to get very volatile.
It
And
impacts.
that's part of, yeah, and that's part of the environment, and that's the game that we're in, you know. And
Yeah.
that's where it becomes, you know, it becomes very difficult to scale that.
Right,
You know,
right,
if I'm Ralek Gracie and I have 30 academies,
right.
what's really going on?
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
know,
No, totally.
it's yeah. So that's an interesting idea in and of itself. But yeah, buddy.
No, man. Thank you so much. Please tell everybody where
Hmm.
they can get a hold of you and see what you do.
My Instagram at Ralek Vision, Ralek Vision, and then yeah, check us out. All good.
Right.
And we have the academy here coming into Franklin, Tennessee, my official headquarters for AG 1925, which is, you know, a homage to the living spirit that my grandfather, the
Yeah.
intention that he set for his community in Brazil, that I'm hoping to, you know, as a spirit,
Yeah.
a guide for the intention that I'm doing here. So yeah, come check us out.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a blessed one. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you for making
Thanks,
time.
Adisa. Okay, man.
Bye. Oh, hey, that was bad. You know what I'm saying?